Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's session of creativity and just a special word of thanks to the organizers and the admins of the Wesley Guild South Africa Facebook page for extending this invite to me to come and share some thoughts around the Covid-19 outbreak, but in particular, the economic response that we have seen from our government. So, so before we start, let us pray. We thank you, Lord, for this opportunity to meet this evening as your children from all quarters of the world to come and discuss about developments that we have seen in our country, but also to better understand the economic impact and what our government is essentially doing in response to that. To deliver whatever I've prepared for this evening. Amen. Yes, and a special welcome to everyone. So before I continue, by way of introduction, Lebo Madibo, currently in lockdown, like many of us. This lockdown has come with certain unique challenges for all of us. But yeah, we are surviving nonetheless. And a little bit about me. I was born and bred in Tabanchu. Ke mosimane wa Morolo. Ke sekgoja ke Mokubung. Ba bangata ba mpona ba re kubu ntsha maruta re bone. So that is who I am, and that is where I am from. So currently I am based in the Central Synod, in particular, Kiko Alexandra Johannesburg Circuit, and I worship at the Alexandra Methodist Church. And it is indeed my privilege and honor to be able to conduct this session for you this evening. So quickly, in terms of what we will cover today, I just want to spend a bit of time to help everyone understand. I do appreciate our audience in Aleba across South Africa, and across different spheres essentially. So we might not all have an appreciation of what's happening right now. Not that but I just want to spend a bit of time explaining why we currently have a lockdown in South Africa, and then to go into why there's a need for an economic response to the lockdown, and then talk about relief measures that have been put in place for businesses and individuals. And then at the end, I will then have a session here, Q&A. I'll take certain questions and then respond accordingly. So you can either save your questions to later, but if you feel like typing your questions in throughout the conversation, you are welcome to do so. I do know I've got other people that are watching who may, during the conversation, also be able to respond to certain questions. But I will respond later on. I'll just and I'll respond while we are still live, going through questions that people have posted, and then responding to them accordingly. And I've maybe before I continue, I just want to start with a disclaimer that essentially this evening I am just sharing my own views. I am not speaking on behalf of anyone. I'm not speaking on behalf of the church. I'm not here to defend what the government is doing. But mine is essentially just to help you to better understand what our government is doing in response to the pandemic or the COVID-19 outbreak that we currently have, not only in South Africa, but the world. So yeah, thanks. Hopefully we'll have a good session together, have a good engagement from everyone. Those who are members of the Wesley Guild, this is See Creativity. And in the Wesley Guild, this is one C that we essentially use to help better understand, in particular, um, popular issues or topical issues tse leng hore re shebane le tsona as society. So why are we currently in a lockdown situation? So we currently have an illness that is known as Covid-19, the coronavirus of 2019. Coronaviruses have been there. We've had others previously, but the one we are currently dealing with is the one from 2019, hence it's called COVID-19. And so this is essentially a new virus that we don't have a vaccine or a cure for. And if we talk vaccine, we are talking about medication that you can take that will help you prevent you from getting sick, or alternatively you can have a cure that will completely wipe out the illness from you. And at the moment we don't have a cure or a vaccine for COVID-19. It's a relatively new illness, but something special with it. It's an illness that is currently spreading like wildfire. It spread from the country of China, and it has essentially reached all corners of the world. And South Africa, unfortunately, also got this illness within its borders. And so, because it's an illness that is spreading like wildfire, it's a respiratory illness. It affects the lungs. I'm sure doctors can better explain the impact it has on the lungs and so on. And yeah, so simply because it's spreading like wildfire, the more people get sick, the more pressure we're going to have on our health sector. In this country, I mean, we've got limited hospitals, we've got limited hospital beds. And so for an illness such as this that does not have a cure, a vaccine, it can essentially, as people get sick, people that need attention, if you've got such high numbers of people, it might put a lot of pressure in your health sector. So essentially, as a response to this illness that is spreading like wildfire, where we currently don't have a cure, our government then took a decision to essentially delay the rate at which the virus is spreading. So that was done, in a form of this lockdown, to say, what, I read somewhere that, a virus does not spread itself, but actually people spread the virus. So if you can try and contain the movement of people, then you will also be able to contain the spread of this virus. But the delay in the spread is essentially to help our government to build capacity within the health sector, so that as and when cases increase, the government is better prepared, because when this thing hit us, we had all those limitations that I had already alluded to. So yeah, so a lockdown was essentially necessary, firstly to delay the spread, but also to allow our government some time to be better prepared to deal with this. And we've seen in the past months, actually, the government has been working to increase its capacity in hospitals and all of that to better deal with this. So this will essentially give our government a bit of time to then effectively deal with the spread of COVID. So that's why we got into a situation where there was a lockdown. Now, what I want to then talk about is the impact of this lockdown, and essentially how we then have to respond to the lockdown. So the impact of this, and to understand what the lockdown is going to do to our country, South Africa is a country that has got a GDP of about 5 trillion. So with GDP, we are talking about what the country is able to produce in a year. So it's the total value of goods and services, or the value of the economic activity in the country. It's about 5 trillion. Um, so now, the minute you enforce a lockdown, that essentially means the economy of South Africa, because now you're going to have fewer days of active work or active production. South Africa as a country will not be able to reach. And by the way, this 5 trillion that I'm talking about is what South Africa was able to achieve in 2019. So if you limit then the workings of this country, it goes without saying that businesses will operate less and people will work less, and so there's no way that we can achieve the same 5 trillion that we achieved in the previous financial year. So there will essentially be a reduction in what South Africa is able to produce through the sale of goods and services rendered. So this output that we get, the GDP, is essentially a function of businesses that are operating, but also people that are working. So then this effectively means if there's a lockdown, there's going to be an impact on both businesses and people, and what both people and businesses are able to essentially generate as income over this period where there is a lockdown. So because there's going to be this hole or the gap in the economic activity, it is then important for government, which is what we're going to be talking about today, to put into place certain measures to try and mitigate the sort of shrinkage that the economy will experience as a result of the economy not being in full operation throughout the year. So that is really why government has taken the step to essentially intervene in this instance. So yeah, so one question that we can ask ourselves essentially is, what will this lockdown cost South Africa? And it is very tricky to say at the moment. Um, uh, and if you were to look at, taking the total value of the economy, the 5 trillion over 12 months, that comes to about 416 billion per month. So if we were to have lockdown for 1 month, um, where no one is working and the country is in complete shutdown, then we would lose about 416 billion per month. But at the moment, as you know, there are certain businesses that are not closed. They are still operating. Businesses that are providing essential services are still operational. So one thing that we know is that South Africa won't lose 416 billion per month, um, because of these other businesses that are still able to operate. But nonetheless, there will be, something that is lost in the economy. And so our response from government is essentially aimed at closing that hole where, the economic activity will be essentially lost. So the whole idea is that our economy should not suffer a lot. And so the government is going to come with certain measures to try and close the gap. So last week, the president then spoke of a relief package of 500 billion that government will put together and essentially bring back into the economy. But also on Friday, the Minister of Finance, Tito Mboweni, spoke about additional funding that will be made available through the monetary system that is governed by the Reserve Bank. So the Reserve Bank, through its own measures, hopes to release about 300 billion back into the economy. So this essentially brings back about 800 billion, of the interventions, 500 billion from government and this 300 billion from the Reserve Bank, or through measures that have been implemented by the Reserve Bank. So this then says, and this is my assumption, that possibly all indications are that, maybe South Africa through this lockdown may lose about 10 to 16% of GDP, which works out to this 800 billion of government plus what the Reserve Bank has released. And so our government is just being proactive to say, okay, let's pump money back into the economy so that the effects of the lockdown are not as severe. So it will essentially be about 800 billion back into the economy. And just to add, I mean, the sort of relief package that we see is not unique to South Africa. Other countries have actually been putting, similar measures in place, the likes of Japan. And I know Japan it's got a higher package of about 20% of their GDP, whereas, countries are between 5 and 10%. So what South Africa is doing is essentially not unique. This is how the whole world is essentially responding. So talking about the 300 billion, so what we would have seen in the last couple of months is that the Reserve Bank has decreased interest rates from about 10%, or prime lending rate from about 10%, and is currently sitting at about 7.75%. So what that essentially means is that, individuals as well as businesses are going to have less interest to pay. And so people will save a bit of money on their repayments, and businesses will save a bit of interest on their repayments to the banks for whatever loans they may have received from the bank. So that is essentially, part of this 300 billion that the Reserve Bank is going to make available. And the 300 billion is essentially, just free cash that we are going to have as individuals throughout the throughout the lockdown period, or until such time that the Reserve Bank revises this. So there's about 300 billion, and I know it's not only through the reduction of interest rate, but the Reserve Bank has put in place other measures which I won't talk about today. But the whole point here really is, there are a lot of people who spend less on paying for their debts, and so they'll have some free cash that should help ease the pressure, especially for those that probably won't be working and things like that during this time. So the government then will pump 500 billion and will raise 500 billion. And there's always been a question around where is this 500 billion coming from? So what the president mentioned last week is that 130 billion will come from the existing government budget. So in February, Tito Mboweni spoke about the budget allocation to different government departments. And so 130 billion of that money that was already allocated to government departments will no longer go there, but will be redirected towards these COVID-19 initiatives. For now, there's no clarity as to which departments will forego, how much. That is something that will be clarified as it goes. But what we can know is government is saying part of what it had planned to spend on other government programs, it will now spend on, or 130 billion of it will now be spent on this COVID relief. So that's the first one. And the second one, or second source of this raising of the 500 billion it will be from what the president referred to as local partners or local sources. And he specifically singled out the UIF. And the reason for this is that in South Africa, the UIF, which is the Unemployment Insurance Fund, always has sort of excess funds where people who are to go and claim money after they've, lost employment and so on, they generally don't go to claim money. So there's some monies that are left over from there, and possibly those monies will then be tapped into to close this gap. And then the other monies that will be raised locally from other local partners. And so whatever that is then not raised internally, we will then, as a country, go and borrow this money from some international funding institutions. So know that from the president's speech that we as South Africa will approach the African Development Bank for financing, as well as the New Development Bank, which is what used to be known as the BRICS Bank, formed by Brazil, Russia, India, China, as well as South Africa. So South Africa has been borrowing money from the BRICS Bank for various day-to-day runnings of the country. And so, can still be approached the New Development Bank can still be approached to help fund the Covid-19 relief. And then there will also be, funding opportunities or possibilities from the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. And so from what we heard, from the Minister of Finance is that, and not only from him, but information that has been made is that, for this type of funding, all these funders have come up front to say they will not impose any stringent or onerous conditions when they lend money to countries, essentially, So, because at the end of the day, what South Africa is going through, the whole world is going through. We are all responding to a crisis that we did not create as individual countries. So institutions that have got funds and can help other countries have effectively said, you know what, they can actually make the money available to us with no onerous conditions. At the moment, it's not clear what conditions may be put in place. But what has been said is that there won't be onerous conditions, and probably there won't even be interest charged on these loans. And it should be important to mention that because South Africa was downgraded junk status last month, if South Africa was to go outside to raise money, essentially, it will be quite expensive for us as a country to raise money because we are now junk status. But to have junk status and still go and borrow money at 0% interest rate, for instance, can still be a favorable form of raising funds. And this is essentially what our government is pursuing to help raise this 500 billion. But like I said, at the moment, it's not known how much will be sourced externally. But, one thing that we know is whatever shortfalls are there, the government will then approach these funding institutions. And so then the next question is, now that we're going to have this 500 billion and the 300 billion that is given to us through the easing of interest rates and so on, how will this money be spent? So the 500 billion, government has mentioned that it's really targeting 4 areas. One is the health sector. So the government, as I said, is in a position where it enforced the lockdown, firstly to delay the spread, but most importantly also for the government itself to get ready. So there are funds that will be dedicated to this. I think the number is around 20. Over and above the current budget that the health sector has, there'll be an additional 20 billion that will be allocated to help strengthen efforts in the health sector, to, as the president mentioned, to help, acquire certain equipment, in particular ventilators, not the other thing that Minister Mthembu spoke about over the weekend. I'll call it as it is, it's ventilators, these machines that help people to breathe. not the other thing that he mentioned, which I won't repeat on this church platform. So the whole idea is to put together these relief measures for the health sector so that our health sector remains empowered to be able to deal with this pandemic. And secondly, the government said they want this money to specifically look at supporting employees and businesses. But also these monies should work towards bringing some relief in terms of hunger and social distress. So then the fourth element is then aimed at working on the phased reopening of the economy. So that still talks to supporting certain sectors that are currently not going to be operational, depending on the levels of lockdown that we are going to go through. Okay, so maybe for now, before I get into the relief that individuals will get, I just want to spend a bit of time talking about relief that businesses will get. Remember, the relief is essentially looked at saving businesses, but also saving the lives of people. So I just want us to remember all of those. So one thing for sure that we know is as businesses spend less time, in production and generating income, there is a high risk that people's jobs will essentially be under pressure. So part of what government has put in place is to relieve pressure of businesses. So this will essentially work, towards helping businesses have extra cash available, especially those that are not going to be operational throughout the different phases of the lockdown. And so based on what the government has within its control, it has made certain means to make sure that all sectors of businesses are essentially accommodated. So businesses will have certain tax relief measures where government says, and government is quite strict, in terms of payments of taxes. If you don't pay your tax on time, you immediately get hit by a 10% penalty. So the government has said it won't put pressure on businesses to pay taxes, but will allow them to defer and pay taxes at a later stage. So that will then say, simply put, for whatever cash that the business currently has, it must try not to prioritize taxes for now, but rather look at, saving its employees and all of that. So there's a delay in payments of taxes. Last week, you also mentioned that part of the taxes that can be delayed, 35% of the pay as you earn tax can equally be delayed. And there are other taxes, taxes on alcohol and tobacco products that have also been deferred, but simply because at the moment we don't have any sales of alcohol and tobacco products. And so government hopes that by allowing businesses to pay later, businesses with whatever free cash that they have will focus, just on paying their employees. And then, once the business is up and running again, it can go back to government and pay, the related taxes. So yeah, so that is how the government, through the tax system, is hoping to bring, some relief to the businesses. But the other thing which the government has done is put together relief packages directly for businesses. And something which the government has done, which is quite good, is to recognize businesses from, the informal sector, the spaza shops, and then go upwards until recognizing small and medium enterprises. So there are relief plans which will be put in place that will help relieve spaza shops, as well as informal traders. There was a briefing actually this afternoon. I didn't get a chance to sit in on the briefing, but the minister, or rather the ministers that were briefing today, mentioned that they've got a database of about 140,000 spaza shops or something like that. So with these, there'll be funds available or made available to all these people training in the informal sector in spaza shops to essentially help, them with their relief, as well as small and medium enterprises that will get this relief. There was 200 million that was set aside for that, and um, uh, the last month there was a mention of certain donations that were going to be made by some wealthy families in South Africa, the Ruperts and the Oppenheimers, the Motsipes. So part of that money will be used to give businesses interest-free loans that can be repayable over a period of 5 years. And so, for some people, a loan is a loan, it has to be repaid. But for some people who currently have no source of income at the moment, um, relief packages like this simply mean you can be given funding to survive for the next 6 months, but you are then given the next 5 years to repay that money. So there's this type of fund still gives you breathing space, to make up the money in your own time and eventually pay it back. And that's how some of those interest-free loans will work towards the businesses. But I won't go through all of these interventions. They are available on the website of the Department of Small Businesses. And then what I want to talk to now is then the relief for the individuals. So the relief for the individuals, talking both, the employed and the unemployed. Part of what government has recognized is the fact that South Africa has got a lot of people that are quite vulnerable. And so part of the relief measures are aimed at equally addressing the needs of the vulnerable over a period of 6 months. It's a temporary intervention relief fund. And essentially, the unemployed, people who are unemployed will receive a basic grant of about 350, but this is provided they are not getting any other grants. Some people may be unemployed but also disabled, and you find currently they are getting a disability grant. So if you are already receiving such a grant, then you won't qualify for this 350. So the 350 is designed for people who are in any way not generating any form of income, be it through grants, or maybe they are unemployed, but they are still drawing some money from the unemployment insurance fund. So that is 350 that will be put in place. So I know we've got in our sectors as guilders, we've got quite a lot of young people that are unemployed and other congregants that are unemployed. So, it's my hope that we spread the word and those who've got means to help, people to get registered for this so that they too can benefit from this basic income grant. And then what the government has also said is that there will be a top-up grant for other existing grant beneficiaries. So there'll be a top-up for the children grants, 300 extra in May, and an additional 500 from June to October. It's a bit of a contentious one, and a lot of people have said, based on what the president said last week, it had sounded like, the 300 or 500 extra would be paid per child. But, when the Minister of Finance spoke last week, Friday, he mentioned that this would essentially be per caregiver. So if you're already looking after 2 children, you won't get an additional 500 for both, but just a once-off 500. Something along those lines, but it's something that the ministers will hopefully clarify in the coming days. And so, so in other grant beneficiaries, pensioners and those on disability grants and so on, will then get an increase of 250 per month. So those are interventions that are, relating to the vulnerable. We're still waiting for the Department of Social Services to essentially announce in terms of plans around, food distributions, things like that. So, as time goes, we will better understand how those are going to work, especially around, the issuing of vouchers versus delivering an actual food package. So those are the measures that are aimed at individuals. So the other element which I want to touch on, and now this essentially relates to those that are employed and the relief measures that are there. And so here we've been, as I mentioned earlier, the Reserve Bank has spoken about the reduction of interest. So there are people who will already be saving on a monthly basis. If you've got a car, a house that you are paying, you're going to be, paying less for this month and for the foreseeable future. So that is the relief that will be coming to you. And then there are certain banks that have also spoken about payment holidays. And there are certain insurance companies also that have said, they give people discounts because they understand that now you're sitting at home, you're not driving, so they'll give you a discount on your insurance premiums. All of these are aimed essentially at helping people to have free cash flow. And I just wanted to touch on this thing of payment holidays. So banks will come and say, okay, they're going to give you a payment holiday for 3 months. And I just want us to be sure we understand how the payment holiday works. And I will encourage anyone who is interested in this payment holiday to also ask questions from the bank. But typically what the banks will say is, yeah, we're going to give you a 3-month holiday. But what is essentially not known or what is not communicated clearly is, whether or not interest will still be charged during the 3 months where you're not paying. So this is the first question that we need to ask of our banks. Because essentially, if you take the option of the payment holiday, and I'll make an example. I mean, if you currently owe, say, 1,000 rands at the end of May, or let's say the end of March, and you get a 3-month payment holiday. So that means by April, the bank is going to add interest on what that you owe. So this will then go to, say, 1,100 that you owe. And then the next month is going to be 1,200 that you owe. And then by month 3, now all of a sudden you owe 1,300. And then now it is the 1,300 that you essentially have to now start to repay. And you might find now, you come back and now your monthly installments are a bit higher, especially where there's a fixed term within which you have to essentially pay this. So, yeah, so I just wanted to touch on that. And then other relief for employees. As I've said, with businesses that are unable to operate during lockdown, it goes without saying that, the businesses won't have enough cash to pay their employees. And so certain employees may be forced to take leave. And, the Department of Labor has said in their communications that, employers are allowed, to say, don't come to work and put you on leave. There's nothing that prevents employers to do that. So I just want people to be able to understand that. And secondly, in the event that then you are put on leave, what government has then done is to put together what is called a temporary employer-employee relief scheme. So this is a fund that will be put aside, which will help to pay salaries for employees whereby their employers are unable to pay. So this is what's called the TERS, TERS, and this fund will be administered by the UIF. And I think what's important here to mention is that the UIF will be a separate fund, and the COVID temporary relief will equally be a separate fund. So it's not like the temporary relief scheme will in any case eat up what is left in the UIF fund. So this will be separate, and the TERS fund will essentially get, monies from that 500 billion that will then help employees to essentially get their salaries. And how this thing will work is essentially employers will continue paying employees' salaries and then claim whatever they've paid from the TERS. So government is just avoiding a situation where we've got more and more and more people going directly to the UIF to claim. And one of the things that was mentioned was that the UIF has actually increased its staff. I think they went from having 70 people that deal with claims, and now they've got like 400 or so. So the idea is to help people as much as possible, you know. So this temporary employer relief scheme, you know, so for you to be able to benefit from this as an employee, you should already be registered for UIF. So your company should have already registered you for UIF and on a monthly basis then pay a UIF over for you. So those who are not registered with the UIF, then there'll be a challenge in terms of them claiming from this fund. So that's the first thing I just wanted people to be clear on. And then secondly, and I won't bore you with the details, but how this thing is set up is, you know, people will obviously make applications through their employers to get this benefit. And it's been designed such that there will be a minimum payout of 3,500 and a maximum payout of about 6,300. And the 3,500 is essentially the minimum wage rate in South Africa. So I think last year or year before, you know, our government signed into law the minimum wage rate. And so anyone who works in South Africa should, at a minimum, be earning 3,500. So this temporary employer-employee relief scheme is essentially reinforcing that minimum wage rate, and so there won't be anyone who's going to earn less than 3,500. That's essentially what this benefit scheme says. But also the benefit scheme puts a cap, a maximum of 6,700 as to what people can claim. And I think one thing to also emphasize here is, you know, even if you can qualify to get the full 6,700, the employer and the scheme will ensure that you don't earn above what your normal, you know, salary would have been. So there's a formula that the UIF is going to use to determine how much must be payable to you. So, you know, some based on the formula, it might say only 2,500 is payable to you. If the formula says 2,500, the UIF will then increase your payment to 3.5, as I've said, because it's the minimum wage. But maybe if the formula kicks out a number that says you should essentially be paid 8,000, that will then be lowered to the 6,700, which is the minimum that the fund can pay. And so, and the 6,700, even though you qualify for it, when you get, you should, so essentially there's a rule that says whatever that you get from this fund should not put you above what your current salary is. So there'll be a limit there, you know. So if ordinarily you are earning 10,000 and your employer says, okay, during this time we will only pay you, for argument's sake, 7,000. When you go to the UIF for this fund, even though maybe you might qualify for 4,000, you will only be paid 3,000 so that you don't go above, you know, your normal salary. So people must just bear that in mind, that whatever happens, you firstly won't exceed what you're currently earning, you know, because there are employees who will, you know, partially make payments for their employees. Okay, so that is the sort of the relief measures that have been put in place for the employees at the moment. And essentially, what this means is businesses must avoid at all costs to terminate employees, contracts of employees. If they terminate, kill them. So not kill, but rather terminate their contracts. Government is encouraging that, you know, do whatever you can, pay half, pay the other half, So there are ways and means that have been put in place here to essentially help businesses not to trench their. So in a nutshell, these are the relief measures, that have been in place. One thing that we know is that over the coming months, or not months, days, government will continue to make additional pronouncements on how these relief measures are going to be utilized and all of that, and we'll get updates on how it's going with the raising of funds. So and I think the one thing which we know is our economy will never be the same, you know, um, and the president has mentioned that there should be essentially a new social compact or a new social agreement of how South Africa is to do business. I mean, the Minister of Finance already started talking about this last. The new economy, we want to see more South Africans being employed and things like that. Um, so we'll see. It's difficult to say how the future economy is going to look post-COVID, but one thing we know is that the government is doing all that it can to save businesses and to save salary of employees, to save jobs and all of that. Whether or not that is enough is not for me to say. As I said, today I just wanted to share with you all of these measures that have been put in place. So, in a nutshell, I mean, if I was to reflect on what we spoke about today, is essentially, talking about the need for a lockdown and the fact that, we need to contain the spread and make sure that we get our health system ready to cope. And because one thing we know is that the virus will continue spreading, but we don't want it to spread at a significantly high rate such that we are unable to cope. Or our health system is unable to cope. Because remember, our health system is not only looking after COVID patients. There are still other day-to-day patients that need to be seen by doctors, that need to receive medical attention, people with existing, illnesses. It can be heart disease, people with TB, HIV, whatever we can think about. Those people still need to have access to the health system. And what we don't want is for people then to sit and not get access to hospitals because now we filled the hospitals with, COVID patients. Something that we also saw in Italy, where the COVID patients were just outnumbering even the normal, day-to-day patients that need to be attended to by the medical system. So that was the first thing we talk about. And the fact that now we're going to be in lockdown and the country not in full operation, it then means, we need some economic relief to essentially close or help where the economy was going to shrink. So that is why we have this economic relief that was announced by the government, and that government will raise 500 billion, and 300 billion of this will then be raised by, well, not raised essentially, but it will be extra cash that is made available to us through measures put in place by the Reserve Bank. And then what's important also for us to note is that this 500 billion will be firstly raised through existing budgets, the 130 billion, as well as monies from the current UIF, as well as certain financial institutions that will be approached. And all of this is done so that, we are able to firstly reinvest in the health sector, but then take care of our vulnerable and essentially protect our businesses and employees. And just important to note that, every single type of business in South Africa has been catered for, informal traders, spaza shops, and small and medium enterprises. So all of these will be catered for as part of this relief package. So this then concludes my presentation for this evening. Initially, I thought I would take 30 minutes, but yeah, I'm quite surprised I'm on 15 minutes already. So as I said, now I will sort of go through your comments and pick up certain questions or comments that you may have. But thank you very much for joining. Remember to keep safe and wear your mask. I won't attempt to put it on like the president did in case I embarrass myself on live Facebook, but keep safe all the time. And so those who still want to engage me on certain questions, I'll just be available for the next 10 minutes. I will now go back into the comments and start picking up, certain questions that are going to come through. And then, I'll take it from there. Some messages here, people are just saying hi. So it's fine. Hi, everyone. And a special thanks to everyone that, preparing for the presentation. I actually got enough input from different people who's, said, perhaps touch on that, help us better understand this, help us better understand that. So thank everyone who's made a contribution to what I discussed today. So I will essentially just go to the comments now and see what questions I can pick up. There's a question from Mamelo. Please take us through the interest rates on savings versus loans. I'm not sure I understand that question, but I'll take a step at this. And so essentially at the moment, what we have will be interest rates that are being charged on loans that people take out, and also interest rates that we are going to earn based on savings that we are going to have. So at the end of the day, my thinking, or what will essentially happen, is those of us who have put money away in certain investments that generate interest, we are then going to have lower returns there. It's not the best type of situation to be, but those who are heavily debted will then get relief from the essentially the payments of interest. Okay, so let me see what other people are saying. Okay, so I see a comment, Masejo, asking about people that got paid 40% of their salary. So essentially here, what should happen, as I said, businesses, especially those that are not generating any income now, will each check, how much they have cash as cash available to then pay their employees' salaries. And so if, businesses can only pay 40% of salaries, what they should then do is, go ahead and pay the 40% or 50% or whatever they can, and then go to the UIF or this test to apply for difference, essentially, and not just let you be with your 40%. So you can still go back to your employer and say, listen, we know there is this thing that is available through the temporary employer-employee relief scheme. So please go out there and get, whatever difference that you can for our salaries. So that is what essentially I would advise here. Okay, so Tope is asking, based on interventions implemented by the president, how long do you think it will take for the economy to recover from the gap created by COVID? Would you have done it differently? Sure. Yeah, would I have done it differently? I don't know. But look, at the moment, it's difficult to say how long it will take for the economy to recover. But one thing we know is the interventions that have been put in place are essentially aimed at us not going to levels lower than where the economy was last year. So at least start at that basis. To be honest, we were already in a very difficult situation as a country. We had a couple of quarters where we did not generate growth for those quarters and are in recession. So, COVID-19 will further put pressure on that. But through this economic relief, government is just looking to arrest that decline and not have it essentially escalate, and at the moment, your guess is as good as mine. But it will be some time, for. And remember, the other thing is the South African economy is also dependent on what the rest of the world is doing. So we might be in a situation where we are currently easing down on the lockdown regulations, but other countries are still, having hard lockdowns. So even those maybe that we would be selling our goods and services to might be in lockdown. So we might be ready to, start delivering on goods and services, but no one might be ready to start taking those goods and services in. So it's gonna be a challenge. It's gonna be a challenge for a while. For businesses to again pick up the pieces. But all these relief measures are essentially, also designed to say once the certain sectors open up, we as the population of South Africa, we've got that bit of spare cash that we can then quickly reinvest into the economy. So so hopefully the impact won't be that severe, but yeah, we'll see. And could I have done it differently? Probably not. But one thing for sure, and the president has spoken about this, is that we are all learning as this COVID, continues. There are other people who have not had lockdowns, and infections are going high and high and high and high. And like I said earlier, the virus does not spread itself, but people spread it. So possibly it was a good idea to try and limit. In terms of the interventions, there are many opinions out there of to how the interventions could have been better implemented. But what we went through today, it's we can see that every single person in South Africa, in one way or the other, is being targeted to uh, essentially not be left behind during this time. All right. Okay, so I'm just checking for additional questions. Someone says I must leave Mr. Jackson alone. Sorry, I just had to say that. Okay. And then other questions. Okay, cool. So there's a question that asks, where do people register for unemployment grant? So as things stand, so those who are employed should essentially be already registered through their employers to be part of the UIF. The employer has got an obligation to register all their employees as part of the UIF. So it's not something that you will individually go and do. And also how the fund is structured is also to say government does not want 1 or 2 million people all flooding to the UIF office saying we've been short paid or we have not been paid because of COVID, but they want that to rather be done via the UIF or rather the companies through the UIF. So, but yeah, so for those who are not registered, essentially, the company that you are working for should be able to, register you there. Okay. Let's see if there are any additional questions. Thanks, Stephen, for your response talking about credit life insurances. It's quite a good input to say, for those who are unable to meet their monthly obligations to pay their credit, be it for your house or for your car. When you get the loans, certain banks do give you credit insurance, which will allow you to go claim from it to get whatever money that you need to be able to pay your installment for the month. So you just have to check, with your lender if this was in place when you started. All right, so I've got a question from Neo. credit providers are encouraged to apply from the insurance fund. Why can't they write off the consumer's interest? Maybe have to avoid increasing their contract agreements by more months. Yeah, so essentially, this is what our banks and other financial institutions are busy working on to see how best can they relieve their or the people that they have lent money to, their borrowers. And so it could essentially be that, some of these things are still being put in place. But I hear what you say, there is merit in the fact that, everyone is, doing whatever they can. Like I said, a simple payment holiday without the easing of the interest is equally not going to be beneficial for many people. And there was a talk also of African countries coming together and to put together a call that said, how about even debt that is owed by African countries to the rest of the world to equally be written off or something, or so those type of things. It's essentially what the lenders have to grapple with and see if people can put those measures in place to help, because at the end of the day, like I earlier mentioned, we are all responding to a virus that was not created by us, and all these impacts are not our own doing. So we would expect that the rest of the world will essentially be thoughtful and be like, okay, you know what, if people are struggling, it's fine, we'll all come in and show some spirit of ubuntu in all of this, and help each other. But we'll see how the banks operate. Okay, so there's another question. Is it a correct move for government to give out unemployment relief instead of creating employment opportunities? So I think at the moment, because like I said earlier, our economy has essentially not been doing well. So we are already on, junk status. The economy is in recession. So, and to address the immediate need, because some of the things we saw in the last couple of weeks was pressure that was building, within communities where people, are now going country. People are now starting to get desperate. And so that is why it was essentially important for these interventions to be put in place. This is my own view anyway. So for now, the measures that have been put in place are essentially to cushion us during this time where it's hectic essentially for everyone. And then, but precisely what the Minister of Finance was saying, once we bounce back as a country, we should then look at creating opportunities that will specifically be designed to benefit South Africans, So, and I mean, he used quite a simple example of, spaza shops and, even at that level, prioritize South Africans. And so, yeah, so for now, Spamandla, I would say the move from government is essentially just to contain the current challenges that we face. But when the economy turns, I agree with you, employment opportunities should essentially be important to be prioritized, particularly for the yeah, I lost my train of thought there. I'll come back to that point. All right, so I've got quite a long question here from Sinetemba. So please be patient with me. Sinetemba is quite important. She's my treasurer in Central Synod, so I have to respect and read and answer her question. So Sinetemba says, so the 10% to GDP, it's like 500 billion. But the loss to GDP was a downfall of between 5 to 6. But it's been growing since Feb. And is it sufficient, or should we have considered borrowing more since we are borrowing anyway? Rather, to be in a position to regain the 1 million jobs lost instead of focusing on retaining the ones that are still in place. Okay, so that was the first point. Second point is inflation during this period. Can we expect an increase in prices of food, importantly due to limited means of production which affect supply. Yeah, she's quite the economist with her question. Okay, so in terms of should we have borrowed more? Um, as I said, we are looking at so our economy last year was 5 trillion. So 10% of that is the 500 billion. And you then add the 300 from that will be made available through the Reserve Bank. That puts us at 16% essentially of the interventions that have been put in place to cushion the economy. So the growth rate was, as you rightly say, was expected to be, between 6 and 8%. And so if the measures that have been put in place are already looking to reinvest in the economy between 10 and 16%, so possibly our government has already thought ahead of that. And also, maybe if I may add, the fact that we are going to winter season where, the spread of the virus can be easy because a lot of people will be sickly. So we could still see lockdowns throughout that period. And so, and possibly that's why, the rate of 16% that is being reinvested in the is just to cushion us even for those type of levels. And that should essentially then be enough to still contain, but, businesses, certain businesses have already been running light. Similar to the South African economy, some businesses have not been doing well. And the fact that certain businesses have lost revenue for 1 month, they might not even be able to recover. So there is that reality as well that some businesses already, in any case, on the brink of being shut down. So they might not be able to recover anyway. So it might be inevitable that certain jobs will be lost, but I think the interventions from government are saying let us not lose about 10% of whatever jobs that we currently have and try and contain that within the system. Okay, the second question around inflation. Yeah, so I mean, in the strict sense of inflation, we can, but we can expect maybe an increase in prices and so on. But I don't see that happening because, especially for essential services, essential goods, government has not stopped the production of those. So those will still be readily available in the market essentially. So that should then protect, the price of the basic necessities. And some, like other businesses, are in any case not operating for us then to go and fight over buying of TVs or laptops and things like that. So I think for now we'll probably still be cushioned. The only thing which may adversely affect our inflation is the exchange rate, because we do import quite a bit, and with the exchange rate weakening, we can then see a potential increase in inflation, but more due to people who supply us more than us fighting over the same amount of goods. All right. So let me see. I've got another question from Takalani. Okay, so Takalani says, Lebza, thanks for the insight, information, well-packaged presentation. We need to applaud government for the initiative and troubles they are faced with in saving businesses, safeguarding families, making grants available. But now, as said, how will church be affected financially because our economy is shrinking to the left side? Please bring it home. I was hoping this type of question doesn't come today. But personally, the church is not immune. It's part of the greater economy. It's not immune to all of this. So how the church will respond is really it's an open-ended question for now. The church is still, when I'm saying church, I'm including myself, still thinking how to reinvent itself, how to put, certain things in place to survive. So it's an ongoing process. I won't commit at the moment or put my head, on the block. But all I'm saying is, we are all in this together. No one is essentially immune from this. Okay, cool. So it's questions, Pelele. What role has government used to implement the lockdown, and also, in your opinion, what disadvantages come with IMF, etc., etc., etc.? So earlier I had, alluded to the fact that based on what we know, institutions like the IMF or BRICS Bank or the New Development Bank, which was known as the BRICS Bank, the World Bank, and the Africa Bank. So all of these institutions have, for now, said won't have any onerous terms and conditions for these monies. So at the moment, there might not be much in terms of disadvantages, except for the fact that, you just owe people and you need to repay them in the future, but it's money that is there, it's money that is available, and it can be made easily to not only South Africa. I think the IMF last week said they've got a total of about 102 countries across the world that are seeking this type of finance, and they are ready to assist without any conditions, because they just want everyone to be able to respond accordingly. So so that is that. All right, so I've got another question from Lebo. Ask, what happens when COVID-19 ends? The people that will be receiving 350, they will still be unemployed? Is there a long-term plan, or the unemployment fund will end just like that? Yeah, so what we know for now is, the interventions that have been put in place are temporary. They will last for 6 months. As to whether or not this will continue post the 6 months, it's difficult to say at the moment. But and your question is, quite valid, because you're saying, people will get used to this type of income on a monthly basis. What happens on month 7, So, I'm sure government has thought about that, and we'll hear soon, as to how they hope to get around this by the time the 6 months end. All right. Okay, so the question here, people say, Matidis was saying, the question about registering on UIF was meant for those that are unemployed. So, so today's briefing, and unfortunately I couldn't, because of work commitments, I couldn't sit in and pick up all the information, but I know the Social Security will be announcing the process that people will have to follow to be able to get themselves registered and then qualify for this 350 benefit. Okay, cool. All right, cool. Oh yeah, thanks. I see Musa also has responded saying there's a WhatsApp something that will be put in place where people will be given information. But all those details will be made in the next coming days. Okay. Uqesibe is asking, Bralebza, can you also touch on the effects of COVID-19 on the fund balance for those on retirement fund, pension fund, and also those saving with the effects of what the effects of COVID will have on their savings? Sure, it's quite an important point you raise, because what we have seen is a number of these retirement funds have also dropped over the last couple of months, as the market went on a downturn and all of that. So people's pension funds have been negatively affected. I agree. And yeah, but knowing the market and where the pension fund monies are invested, we do expect that there will be a recovery at a later stage. But for now, in terms of the relief that have been announced, it's there has been talk about people that are already on those who are already receiving retirement funding from their pension or provident funds. But but it's a valid question nonetheless. And yeah, my only sense here is after a while we will start seeing the market go up again, and then that will essentially bring up people's investments as the whole world essentially recovers. So yeah, so that's what I think. And then so Stephen here says, and it's quite a valid point he raises, that business relief fund, there are compliance issues, and can some guilders in relevant positions avail themselves to those SMMEs, especially the SMME Tsakokasi? And thanks for bringing this up. It's quite important. There are a lot of small enterprises that will essentially be at risk, and there's funding that's been made available to them. But some of these guys who are running these businesses may not have the knowledge or means to go and apply. And this is an area of community development guilders that we can essentially go and tap into and see how we can best, those of us with the knowledge, with the know, and then see how we can best assist all of these businesses, especially with those compliance issues. Thanks for raising that suggestion, Stephen. I totally agree with you there. Okay, so there's still quite a number of questions that are coming through, or the rest are just comments for now. Okay, so perhaps let me stop there. Let me stop there for now. And essentially, thank you very much for being part and parcel of this session today. And thanks for your questions and engagements. I've really appreciated that. And those that stayed behind, I can see there's about 60 or so people that stayed behind for the Q&A session. Thanks for making it quite a meaningful session for us. And thanks to everyone who's also been, proactive in terms of responding to whatever questions that people have been raising throughout this presentation. So, and best wishes to everyone. I hope we will all remain safe and will take care of each other. All right, so that'll be me signing out. Keep well, stay safe, one heart, one way. Thanks, bye-bye.